Happy Saturday, everybody, and good morning. Today we're going to start off with Million Dollar Throw by Mike Lupica, and we're in chapter 4. So we're going to do chapter 4 and 5 today. So remember the last time we left off, we had just learned that his best friend is blind. So let's see what's happening in Nate and Abby's life. So Nate remembered the first time he had known there was a problem with Abby's eyes. It was a year ago, and they decided to go to a movie on Saturday afternoon in the summer, even though most of the guys had gone over to the public pool at Capo Park. It was the movie about Kit Kittredge, All-American Girl, and wasn't one Nate would have gone to see himself, even on a bet. But Abby never complained when he wanted to see one of his movies. Abby called them all the same thing: War of the Exploding Chasing Car Aliens. So Nate went along with her just to keep her company. It was something he knew he could never possibly explain to his buds or even to Abby herself. But for Nate, it wasn't just sitting back in the pocket where he felt the best. It was pretty much in any room that Abby was in. So they went to the movies, and Nate didn't have a clue at the time, because she hadn't said anything, that she'd started having a terrible time with her night vision, and that she'd already begun to lose most of her peripheral vision. When Nate found out that part later, he said to her, "You can have some of mine," meaning his peripheral vision, his ability to see the field in front of him like it was in the wide letterbox format he watched movies in. Nate couldn't just see the whole field. He felt like he could see behind him sometimes. When a would-be tackler thought he had a clear shot at him from that blind side to his left, blind side. It was what all sides were becoming for Abby, like walls closing in on her. He knew all about the disease called retinitis pigmentosa. Just not then. All he knew that day was that when they were inside the theater a few minutes late, there was this night scene that made it hard for even Nate's eyes to adjust to the dark. And when they were halfway down the side aisle looking for seats, Abby just froze. Nate didn't know right away. He had spotted a couple of seats again and said, "Right there, Abs," only she wasn't behind him. She was about 20 feet back up the aisle, not moving. "I can't," she whispered loudly, and for a second, Nate stupidly thought she just didn't want to sit in the middle seats he'd managed to find. "Okay," he whispered back. "We can move closer if you want." Then Abby finished her thought. "I can't see," she said. Nate walked back up the aisle to her, still not getting it, saying, "I can't see too good either." And in this small voice, not sounding anything like herself, she said, "No, Nate, I can't see anything." Then the movie went back to daylight, and it was a light switch had been thrown in the theater, and they'd made their way to their seats. And just like that, she was back to being Abby. "Well," she said, "that was certainly weird." "Well, yeah," Nate said. Abby poked him and said, "No, I meant weird that you were my guide for a change." It was her way of making all things right, saying it was no big deal, joking that she'd suffered the eye version of one of Nate's famous brain cramps in school. And Nate went right along with her because he always did. Only now he knew that that was the real start of it. Everything that was happening to her, and there was nothing anybody could do to stop it. It was the beginning of everything, and it had forced Nate to learn about how eyes really work or didn't work, about rods and cones and colors, about how Abby's world was on its way to being as dark as a movie theater. So right now I want you to pause the video in just a second and jot down a couple notes about how you would feel if you were going blind and some of the feelings that you would experience. So would you be upset? Do you think it would be, also I want you to think about, do you think it would be harder to be born where you could see and then be blind, or be blind from the start? So answer those couple questions now and pause the video, but I'm going to keep reading. So that was the summer when Abby realized it was more than her having a problem going from dark to light, more than bumping into things at night, more than having trouble sitting in her window and staring at the stars, one of her favorite things her whole life. He knew now that the loss of night vision and peripheral vision were just two of her symptoms. Knew that the cones closest to the center of her eyes were already making her sense of color go haywire. Abby herself had told him that, explaining why her paintings looked the way they did. Explaining that if they both looked at the same rainbow and then she painted it, the colors would look completely different than they had to Nate, as though she were living on the other side of the rainbow. "It's why it's going to be all right, Brady. You wait and see," she said. "Sometimes I feel like I'm painting better than I ever have." In those moments, Nate want to scream at her, even though he never would, that she wasn't going to be able to paint anything once the keyhole shut completely. That's the way he saw things inside his head when he imagined the way the world was starting to look to Abby. He saw them through an old-fashioned keyhole. Nate had looked up retinitis pigmentosa on the internet after Abby had finally told him the truth about what was wrong with her eyes. He found a fighting blindness website, and right there on the first page were 2 pictures. On the left were 2 little boys, both holding soccer balls, smiling into the camera, and underneath that one it read normal vision. On the right was the other picture, most of the frame black, and all you could see was half of each boy's face and nothing else, that and the black. Underneath that one read, "As seen by a person with retinitis pigmentosa," as seen by Abby. Abby through the keyhole. No known cure, the website said, but Nate knew that part already. Knew even worse that usually people lived well into their grown-up years before retinitis pigmentosa made them go completely blind. Knew that was the normal progression with the disease, and knew that the form of retinitis pigmentosa that Abby had, Leber's congenital amaurosis, normally attacked kids at birth, or at least in early childhood. Only the great Abby McCall couldn't be normal, even when it came to going blind. So all the doctors and specialists she'd seen had said the same thing about the onset of Leber's with a 13-year-old, how remarkable that was, and how remarkably rapid the progression of Leber's was with Abby. Nate just thought it figured the remarkable part, just because Abby, now more than ever, was the most remarkable person that he had ever known. Starting with the fact that even now, even with Nate seeing how much harder things were getting for her, especially in school, Abby acted as if the only thing in the world that mattered was Nate making his throw. "The key with you," she said, "is getting your brain to work as well as that arm of yours." "No chance," he said. This was a couple of days after they'd watched him on SportsCenter. Nate and Abby having walked over to Capo Park after a teacher's conference half day of school. Capo Park was one of their favorite places in town, and now they were there. A bench was positioned perfectly in the morning sun, so that even in the middle of winter you could sit without a coat on and remember what summer felt like. The sun was so bright this morning, in fact, that Abby was doing something she never did when anybody except Nate was around her. Wearing the huge wraparound sunglasses with the orange tint, ones that reduced the light hitting her eyes and made her feel more comfortable, because now the days were becoming as hard for her as the nights. There was hardly any good light for her anymore. "You're only fired up because you're the one who got me into this," Nate said. "Set me up to choke my brains out in front of the whole stinking country." "Well, I'll tell you one thing, mister," she said. "I don't care how bright the stinking stadium lights are that night. I am not going to be Goggle Girl." She put her hands on the side of the sunglasses like she was a golfer studying a putt. "I don't know why you hate wearing those glasses so much," he said. "I think you look cool in them." She shook her head. "I may be blind, Brady," she said, "but I'm not stupid." Nate hated when Abby was blind. He thought about it all the time. He just didn't like the word getting out into the air. "You go ahead and line up all the ways I could describe you," he said. "Stupid would be dead last." "They make me look like a nerd," she said. "The star of the new series, Ugly Abby." "Like that could ever happen. You know that's not what I really hate about them," she said. Just like that, her voice changed the way it could when she decided to get serious. "The thing I hate most is how much they draw attention to me." I know you know," she said. "It's why you're you, and everybody else is everybody else." One of her favorite expressions. "Right back at you, Nate." Abby grabbed Nate's football off his lap, then got up off the bench and caught her hip on the end of the long picnic table in front of them, which Nate knew had to sting. She was bumping into things more often lately, but she acted as if it hadn't happened. "Come on," she said. "Where are we going?" "To work on your passing," she said. "Not one of your more brilliant ideas," he said. "Excuse me," she said. "I thought you said all of my ideas were absolutely brilliant." She was across the deck now and whipped a perfect pass at him. "What's the matter?" she said. "Afraid people won't be able to tell which one of us throws more like a girl?" Alright, so your question for now is to answer, when did they find out that Abby was starting to have problems with her eyes? What was happening at that time and how did they discover it? So pause this video and answer that question, and I'm going to keep reading. So now we're in chapter 5. There was no one else on the field. On the other side, way over near the swimming pool, Nate could see people walking their dogs in Capo's new dog park. "One condition before we start," Nate said. "I'm not negotiating, Brady." "Just one," he said. "You've got to keep the sunglasses on." Abby said, "They're not going to help me catch the ball." "If they go," he said, "I go." "You are not the boss of me." "True that," Nate said, smiling. "But I am the quarterback, which means I'm the one who gets to call the plays. It's a rule they passed." "Fine," she said, "but this will cost you down the road." Nate said, "It always does." They hadn't played catch together in a long time, and Nate wasn't sure why she was so fixed on doing it today. Maybe it was just because the weather was so beautiful. Not summer and not fall, but something right in between. Maybe having a day off from school always felt like you were putting one over on the world. Or maybe, just maybe, this was one of those days when Abby, without coming right out and saying so, just wanted to pretend things were the way they used to be. The way they were supposed to be. All Nate knew for sure was this: he was as nervous as if it were 3rd and long, or maybe even 4th and goal. No, that was wrong, because when he was in situations like that in a game, on a real football field in a game, when the ball and the game were in his hands, Nate never really felt nervous, even though he knew the other guys in the huddle were. Nate would get excited, but never nervous. Today he was. He could see how happy Abby was just to be out there with him, and he didn't want anything to go wrong. She moved about 20 yards away from him, clapped her hands, and yelled, "Okay, bring it." "Get closer, Abs." "No, just a little closer, please." She grinned, took one baby step toward him, and said, "Happy?" He wanted to tell her that of course he was happy. He was always happy to be with her on a park field or anywhere else, but the glasses stopped him. Nate couldn't help it. She was right about them. They did draw attention to her, like some sign she was wearing, even on what should have been a perfect day like this. Those glasses shouted that nothing was going to be normal for her from now on. "I'm waiting," she said. Nate took a big step toward her, tossed the ball underhanded. She caught it with no problem, already shaking her head, saying, "This isn't tosses for tots." She whipped a perfect spiral right back at him, not throwing like a girl at all, just throwing. "Put some mustard on the next one, Alice," she said to him, clapping her hands. "This is not a contest," he said, but lobbed the next one back to her overhand. "Better," she said, "but we're not there yet." Abby McCall was graceful in everything she did before she started to lose her sight, before she couldn't help herself from stumbling or bumping into things or ending up on the ground sometimes. She was her old graceful self now, moving to her right on her long legs, stopping, throwing another beautiful pass back to Nate. "Oh yeah," she said, doing her own version of a touchdown dance. "Oh yeah, we're playing some ball now." He threw his next pass a little harder, trying to make it perfect, telling her to focus. Watch the ball out of his hands, making sure it wasn't too low, but wasn't anywhere near her face either. Thinking, this is what it's going to feel like on Thanksgiving night. They threw like this, no problem, for a while, until Nate finally said, "Couple more. I don't want to throw my arm out before the Blair game." "Right," Abby said. "Wouldn't want that to happen because you're putting so much pressure on your throwing arm." She put her hands on her hips. "Who are we kidding here, Brady? You could throw harder with your left hand. It's not like I don't have to lay it in there all soft for Pete sometimes," he said. "You know what I love about you," she said, not ever embarrassed to use that word in front of him. "You are as bad at lying as you are at football. You are as bad at lying as you are good at football." She laughed then, and even with those glasses on, Nate thought she looked tremendous. "Okay," she said then, "one more and we're done." She took off, faking out an imaginary defender like she was the one running Hutchins and Go, not running at full speed, but running. Free, long legs eating up the field. Nate didn't throw this one any harder than the ones before it, and was sure he had led her perfectly, as if he were hitting Liddell with a short swing pass coming out of the backfield. He wasn't sure why she tripped. Wasn't sure whether there was some little hole in the ground or one of those uneven places where there was a patch of green that seemed a foot or two higher than anything around it. It's possible that even if she still had two good eyes, she wouldn't have seen whatever tripped her up, but something did. Nate saw the whole thing playing out like it was in slow motion, saw her start to stumble, knew she wasn't going to be able to stop herself, saw her pitch forward as she completely lost her balance. And now Nate's throw wasn't leading her the way he wanted it to. It was catching her on the side of her head, sending those big sunglasses flying. Nate ran toward her as soon as she hit the ground, getting to her before the ball had even stopped rolling away. "Abs, I am so sorry," he said. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," she said in a quiet voice, not sounding scared or hurt or upset, just quiet. She looked at him then, hard as she could, as though she could see everything that had just happened to her, everything that was going to happen. Then she smiled at him again, bigger than before. "Thanks, Brady," she said. "Thanks," he said. "For what?" She reached up to him with her hand, and Nate helped her up. "For putting me in the game one more time," she said. All right, so we will pick up with chapter 6 on Sunday, which is tomorrow, and we'll come back to this book and we'll read chapter 6 and 7 tomorrow. So again, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to shoot me, get the grown-up at your house to shoot me a message, and I'll be glad to answer any of those. Also, there's new resources on Google Classroom if you need to use those. Enjoy your weekend, enjoy this time with each other, and stay safe and healthy. Bye, guys.